This video is extremely, extremely important. It is about Jesus coming back on a cloud. I'm going to simplify it for you, very key parts. So Jesus said he's going to come back on a cloud in the Bible and be at the right hand of God. Obviously, we must look at this spiritually first and foremost. Okay, we see in Jeremiah and Isaiah the chariots, the wind, 2 Kings 2, the horsemen and chariots of Israel, the warrior spirit. God advances like the clouds in Isaiah. Okay, so now let's understand what is expected of people so we can understand what happens to them when they don't do the right thing. And no one is doing the right thing but me, and my parents are blameless. All right. The obvious and universal principles of good are enough by themselves to lead one to me or to dying alone, still headed for hell for not rallying to me, but at least with their deeds considered. Okay, what were they doing when they weren't aware of my presence in the end? As technology makes it clear that people should not reproduce. What do you need to breed the righteous seed? And you need a world where there isn't a governing class that is using technology to the degree that they are. And it's obvious. Okay. If one was to rally to me, they would then masterfully face the world called Gog and Magog. And they would go up at some point, they would ascend. You die anyway, life is short, life is but a breath, the Bible says. But Western arrogance and illusion, theater arts, propaganda, psychology, etc., and fancy schmancy, chandeliers, so on and so forth, okay, and their accompanying cultures and cultural pyramid, okay, are the main trap in the world. Okay, they confuse the point of life. I use the example, we look at the movie Shaka Zulu. Shaka Zulu, first of all, isn't presented as a man of God in the movie, and I don't believe that he's truly a man of God, but he's trying to be spiritual, okay. And you see the European aristocracy, the royals, what have you, okay, the British colonizing South Africa and the world, and so on and so forth. So Satan is God of this world. It is the West that he chose as the main colonial force. Even in Chinese, you have the Communist Party, North Korea, right? Their cultures, their colonial philosophies and sentiments and rebellious ways of thinking spread and subdued the weak-willed in the world. Okay? Where Shaka was in nature, talking about nature. It's talking about nature and the supernature with moral precision, focus, moral intensity that we see who is of God and who isn't. And the West confuses this with their theater arts and say, oh, it must be white person or white-skinned person or white Jew or LGBT person or whatever. Token minorities follow suit. So I'm sure we can all agree that I'm being fair here. No offense to anyone, for good measure. I'm just telling the truth here, as I usually do. All right. So they confuse the point of life, the skill of a man, what to do, how to serve God, etc. And they lead others with their rebellious talk. Now let's think about what's going on here. See, the sun and the moon are like two eyes, right? The falcon, the eagle, they're like eyes from heaven looking down. I'm not talking about the American spirit, but the animals themselves, okay? The leopard looking down from a tree with an intense look. So nature is showing us that God is watching intensely. Now imagine if God manifested himself, how he would look at you while this is playing out. And the closest thing to that, and it's lost in their video editing, is me when I'm extremely angry, looking into the camera and saying you're doing the wrong thing. So it's that in a form like that, because the sun conveys the image of God, the anointed top martial artist, the person who's doing God's work on the highest level. Okay? So the West puts like one toe in nature and says that they must be anointed and divine and equal to me. They're not. They're in rebellion. With this in mind, let's get into this video, shall we? Psalm 1. Okay, so this is going to end with, I'm going to end on Psalm 11, with he rains fiery coals and burning sulfur and a scorching wind. God is righteous and loves justice. So he's raining these things on them. So you have the people of this world who pretend that they're doing God's work, right? The leaders who are part of the wrath of God, but they're not divine instruments of God, no more than, a rabid dog. Okay, the people in charge, they're dogs. Jesus even refers to them as dogs, the Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Canaanites, as dogs, okay, that are doing the wrong thing. The particular ones he's referring to, Gentile dogs in that case, but in this case, it's the wicked, okay? In Galatians, there's no Jew or Gentile. It's just who's doing right, who's doing the wrong thing. Jesus says, that's your brother, that's your sister, not the people in your flesh-based family, but in your spiritual family. Okay, so God has me, after I die in the spiritual realm, punishing these people with powerful spiritual forces while they live in disgrace forever. And that's part of the sulfur, the coal, what else? The scorching wind, right? The presence, the spirit, the warrior spirit of God saying, why didn't you do the right thing while your essence is suffering forever? But in this world, it is the flesh-based punishments that you're facing. So you're like in a labyrinth where if you don't rally to me and masterfully move, you're moving like a sniveling, cowardly, weak-willed dog with no moral, mental, spiritual, or romantic might, just a worm pretending to have something like that at best. Okay? And you have some fair weather sled or something, and you bring in some evil kids into the world. It's pretty straightforward. Okay? Just telling the truth, and I'm running out of time, so I have to be blunt and straightforward as I can. All right. Do not walk. So in Psalm 1, we're going to go psalm by psalm, more or less, and just explain what is happening, how Psalm 1 through 11, especially we'll get into part 2, where we have Psalm 18, where it talks about God descending into the world with dark clouds around him, shooting arrows and lightning and so on and so forth, and what these things refer to. We'll get to that in part 2. All right, so do not walk or team up or be in the same spirit as the wicked. Psalm 1 is talking about this, because they wither without God's water of life, and God's the fountain of life, etc. And righteousness, they are like chaff that are blown away because they can't stand in the wind of judgment. Remember Luke 23, Jesus says, cry for yourself and your children, okay? And don't have any children, because this is what happens when the righteous are here. What will happen when they're all gone? Because how God's going to remove the power of the wicked is by making it so only wicked people are on earth. And the earth is said to pass away into the realm of the dead. We'll prove that definitively with Psalm 1 through 11. So again, the wicked are like chaff that are withered, and they blow away in the wind because they cannot stand in judgment. Okay? Not every moment of their lives in their pitiful state, not when they finally die. Psalm 2 through 5. I'm trying to crunch this together. Let's go through this quickly. In Psalm 2, the nations conspire in vain against the anointed of God. Okay? It goes on, Psalms goes on to say, do not fear those thousands team up. God will strike them on their jaw. Everything they communicate, everything they say with their actions, their behaviors, their words is going to be garbage, sissy, ninny, nonsense, okay? And eventually they'll burn in hell forever. People love delusions and seek false gods as part of their problem. It talks about this. The righteous see the light of God's face. They get new grain, and it abounds. And grain also stands for bread, which also stands for the heart, and has the joy of heart. Okay? The wicked are hated by God. David asks God to declare them guilty, while favor surrounds the righteous like a shield. So when the storm of judgment comes, the favor of God, the armor of God, the helmet of salvation, best place of righteousness, okay, the belt of truth, and the shield of faith, the sword of scripture, they help them withstand the storm which is going on right now. Everyone else but my parents, because of the favor of having brought me into the world, okay, is not standing in the storm. They're moving like pitiful little worms, with all due respect, and then they're going to be thrown into the lake of fire forever. And the more they bred, the more they're going to be punished, the more evil deeds they've done, etc. All right. So we're on Psalm 6. The enemies are overcome with shame and turn back. Their beds are flooded with weeping. So when you see people, it's like a smile now, cry later. It's like people who do drugs. Just because they're giddy and happy doesn't mean they're not weeping inside and on the way to extremely weeping in death, when they have no illusion and no drugs and things like this and technology to help them confuse themselves. Okay, 7. God, a righteous judge who displays his wrath daily. He sharpens his sword and bow and prepares his deadly weapons, especially flaming arrows. Notice God is depicted as a warrior. So we need that serious warrior disciplined spirit, and it's natural to get to supernatural form, the essence of nature. Okay, supernatural, essence of natural. King Hudhart essence, center, core. The king is the conveyance point, the gate. That is me. I'm the last valid king ever. That's part of how God breaks the arm of the wicked. In Hosea, it says the king of Israel, the idea of the king of Israel, the idea of a gate. The gate is sealed. It's completely destroyed. It is sealed. They're cut off from God. The wicked, especially women and nations, so to speak, are pregnant with evil. Okay, so the nations keep giving birth to evil ideas, spirits, people, what have you. The women, okay, they're pregnant with evil and give birth to disillusionment. Um, Remember, they have no valid moral path to go. That's part of why they're done. There's no valid king to lead them. There's no valid work of God to do after I'm gone. Okay, their trouble starting recoils on them. So it's like all these people. For example, I'm going to get into this briefly. Say white people who act like, why are black people lazy? Why are there 60 million people on welfare and disproportionately black? Because these people set up a system. They're the governing class, managerial class. They made it. They designed it that way. It's by design. It's Babylon's system of deceit. They started trouble, and they blame the victims that they aim their trouble at. But the victims also are in rebellion against God, so they'll be punished. Anyway, I'm running out of time. So they dig the pit spiritually and fall into it. Their violence is on them. Mankind is nothing and lower than the angels in Psalm 8. 9, God upheld my righteous cause, and all the martial art kings before me. I'm in the spirit of not only God, but the kings who were loyal to God every generation. That's what Christ is one way to look at it. The anointed spirit of the king who is chosen. It says, you're chosen, you're the king of kings, you're the king of all kings. Now, the king of kings has two meanings. One, the king of all the kings of the earth who obey God, and none of them are doing it, it's just me. And one can say my father, and also the king, the first and the last, the number one king of kings, right? I'm the top martial artist ever. Think about evolution, think about malnutrition and destiny, and who lived in what period and why, how tall were they, how physically gifted were they, There's a lot of things factor in my body, soul, and spirit that make it clear that I'm the top martial artist ever. Anyway, man, in single combat with weapons, okay, and sparring, which shows transferable, universal, communicable, translatable, convertible skills for sparring. Spiritually, spirit, the spear, S-P-A-R, and spirit, right? The king wears a sword, the spear, and spirit, right? So obviously God's a warrior, and it's the spiritual aspects of it first. Okay, so they dig a pit spiritually and fall into it. Their violence is on them. Mankind is nothing and lower than the angels. 9, God upheld my righteous cause. God and all the alpha martial art kings before me, and my right to rule. Sitting enthroned as the righteous judge, he rules in righteousness and equity, right? Equal. Not just, he doesn't look to the Jews' flesh. He says, who's in the spirit of righteousness, and so on and so forth. Okay, the West especially mocks him with their psychology and lies and their false social orders. He remembers and avenges blood, the right hand of the avenger. This has a lot to do with the argument between the Egyptian pagans and the Egyptian martial art order, which were monotheistic and believed in a martial art order of God. Okay, the Horus is the avenger, Set is the deity of confusion and lies and evil and rape and so on and so forth. Okay, this is why, so it says God avenges, right? And the right hand as the avenger, the avenging hand, right? This is why I am here to calculate it in my soul as they mistreat me, God in the flesh, so to speak. The nation fall into the pit they have dug. Their feet are caught in the net they have placed. The Lord is known by his acts of justice. The wicked are ensnared by the work of their hands. The wicked go down to the realm of the dead, all the nations who forget God. So your work are important. God is known. You know that I'm right with God because of my just arguments, unlike their church garbage and so on and so forth. The wicked man hunts down the weak who are caught in their scheme, spiritually, morally, mentally, and romantically weak. He boasts about his heart's cravings. They bless the greedy and revile God. So the churches say, you should be financially stable to get married. Hogwash, that's evil. Money is the root of all evil. It's a satanic system where they carefully manage who is able to get a job and so on and so forth. Okay, they say thank you for your daily bread, and they literally the food on the table instead of the presence of God, and they have the presence of Lucifer and so on and so forth. Anyway, he is too proud to consider God. His mouth is full of lies and threats. They threaten me subtly and otherwise every day, and fume me and abuse me. Trouble and evil are under his tongue, right? His actions, not just his literal speech. He lies in wait near villages, ambushes, robs, rapes, and catches helpless people and drags them off into his net. He thinks God will not hold him accountable for the harm he causes, only allows scum to breed, so the arm of the wicked is broken. Okay, I brought that earlier. So God is only going to allow scum to breed, so I don't have any children. The wicked bend their bows to shoot at the upright in heart. Okay, upright in heart romantically as well. God sees them from his heavenly throne. The wicked who love the fruits of violence, God hates with a passion. Okay, it's Psalm 11. Again, he rains fiery coals and burning sulfur and scorching wind. God is righteous and loves justice. Thank you.